Right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Audit Committee. I would particularly like to welcome those members of the public and press watching the live stream. As with all technology, there is always the possibility of something going wrong with the live stream. If anything should go wrong, I will adjourn the meeting until the issue has been resolved. If we are unable to resolve the issue, it will be necessary to postpone the rest of the meeting. Right, agenda item 1 is public question time. Thank you, Tracy. Item 2, apologies and substitutions, and we have a full house. So.
We do, Chairman.
Item 3, declarations of interest. Does any member have any interests to declare for any items on the agenda? Nope. Item 5 is Chairman's announcements, and I have no announcements to make today. Oh, hang on, I've skipped minutes. Sorry, item 4 is the minutes, to approve the minutes of the meeting held on 17th July. We have one suggested addition which has been tabled, and I'm content with that addition. So can I have a proposer and seconder? Thank you.
Assuming that's my addition.
Yeah.
Second it.
It's been tabled. Yeah.
And that has been incorporated into the minutes, Chairman.
Yes, I noticed that. Right, as I said, item 5, I've no announcements to make under Chairman's announcements, which brings us on to agenda item 6, corporate risk register review, A6 and C3. And can I ask John Hill to introduce the report?
Before we go into the report, can I make a personal statement, please? And could I ask for that to be recorded? I'll send you the words after the meeting. I'm a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales. As such, I'm required to bring my expertise to bear in my work on this council. I'm finding it increasingly difficult to justify my membership of an audit committee which does not follow the guidance of the Chartered Institute of Public Finance in fundamental ways. I hope that by making this statement and having it recorded, I'm showing that I've recognised the weaknesses and can remain on the committee to do my best to discharge my responsibilities despite the constraints. My repeated requests to invite key officers to this committee, in particular the Risk Management Group, have been refused. I have been told that there are no minutes or notes of the Risk Management Group meeting, which this committee can review, and the chair and I were refused access to meetings of the Risk Management Group. CIPFA is quite clear that this committee should have the right to call on any other officers or agencies of the authority as required in order to discharge its responsibilities effectively. They further advise that a frequent problem with audit committees is that attendance is often limited to the Chief Financial Officer and the Head of Internal Audit, and suggest that an improvement would be to expand the attendance at audit committee meetings. For example, invite heads of service when major risks or control issues are being discussed. My initial concerns arose from the inability of this committee to get clear explanations for why the Risk Management Group felt that all risks were under control, despite several risks having occurred. For example, ECSS failing to collect bins reliably and overspending without warning by almost £500,000. We now have an acceptance that the risks relating to ECSS were not correctly identified and should have been assessed as well above the Council's risk appetite. I'm concerned that my request to invite officers, directors, observers, ECSS external auditors and Risk Management Group to this meeting have been refused. I'm also concerned that my written questions to anyone other than officers have not been answered, and it has been stated that in fact those written questions can only be made to officers. The inability to question these people severely restricts our ability as an audit committee to discharge our duties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. John.
Thank you, Chairman. This report is before you today as a result of your decision at your last meeting And the resolution was quite clear. It focused on the corporate risk register, particularly in relation to the risks related to ECSS, East Cambs Street C, particularly in the context of the 2022-23 overspend, which I've quantified in paragraph 4.5. Chairman, this has been very much the focus of my review. Nevertheless, when I did correspond with both yourself and Councillor Kane, I suspected that the extent of the review would mean that you would move into areas where you would need to make recommendations to other member bodies. I think this is proven to be the case, particularly in the light of the risk management group escalating the risk score for A6. My initial scoping of the review is outlined in paragraph 4.2. I think the other important thing, Chairman, is to note that any review you will look obviously backwards, and we've looked backwards to learn the lessons for the future to inform our future recommendations. And with that in mind, I've assisted members by providing a chronology in paragraph 4.3 and the accompanying notes of the timeline of the formal reporting. I've also included records of informal communications that occurred between myself and members, and on one occasion parish councils. My conclusions from this timeline and the wider issues of risk and governance are detailed in paragraph 4.5, and with your permission, Chairman, I'd like to spend some time going through those with you. I think it's pretty obvious and fair to say that the reporting arrangements for ECSS board and for ECDC did not fully reflect the necessary information, and certainly not the financial position that ECSS was placed in during 22-23. I do reference that the majority of that overspend related to the changes of terms and conditions, which were not known until the outcome of the consultation on November the 1st, 2022. Nevertheless, and it's acknowledged in the report, there were other cost pressures that were known and should have been brought to the attention of members and of the board. There are governance failures with respect to the memorandum of agreement, and that's especially of an issue in relation to the formal reporting arrangements and the need for escalation in the event of an overspend from the ECSS board to either council or to its shareholder committee. And obviously one of the recommendations is seeking to address that, and that will be discussed by council. There are inconsistencies in terms of the risk register, and obviously very much the focus of this was for the risk management group to be informed by my review and revisit their conclusions, which was required of them by this committee. And it's particularly important, I felt, that there was need for clarity in relation to what the risks were for the council as the client and ECSS as the contractor. The risk register did not make that clarity very clear. It's worth noting significant mitigations are put in place since the 22-23 overspend, such as now circulating all board agendas to every member, to make sure that we have regular report of management accounts to ECSS, and the proposed revisions to the memorandum of agreement. Nevertheless, Chairman, there remains considerable challenges, both for the service strategically and operationally moving forward. I want to just dwell on the strategic challenges, and although that's very much a matter for Operational Service Committee, I think it's important in the context of mitigating the risk that the risk management group have presented to you. The authority, together with the waste disposal authority, has a great deal of challenges from legislation, which is not entirely clear to us yet. And of course, the other important timeline is that we are required to assess and potentially change the way that we deliver through ECS or any other body its service from 2025. So the requirement, those strategic challenges are even more important to you. I concluded that there's a very much a requirement for increased resources on the client side, and a requirement to make much more separate the roles and responsibilities of the council and of ECSS, and that's particularly at senior management level. My specific proposals arising from this review are detailed in 5.1 for members. And again, with your indulgence, Chairman, I will take members through those because I think they're absolutely important. Risk Management Group have made recommendations in terms of changing the residual and inherent score for A6, leading to a change in the RAG rating to red. That requires that this is brought to the attention of council, which it will be later this week. I think it's very important that they've clarified the definition of A6 to include both the financial and operational pressures facing ECSS. I welcome the new corporate risk A7, which makes a very clear distinction between the risks affecting the council as a strategic partner and as a client, and separate that from A6, which specifically now relates to ECSS. There are changes that are indicated to the memorandum of agreement, which will be presented to council on Thursday of this week. I feel it's appropriate the audit committee should put its shoulder to those recommendations and make a very clear recommendation of council of support. So it goes some way to mitigating the risks I've identified in this review. The strategic review of service, and it's entirely appropriate for this committee to make recommendation to other committees if it seeks in this instance to mitigate risk. I think you need to make a very clear recommendation to Operational Services Committee to start the process of the strategic service review. And in one of the answers, I think, to your question, Chairman, I've given my indication, of course, in terms of the timeline and the scope of that review, but clearly it's a matter for members and Operational Services Committee. And I have made, and I've distributed information of this to members and a revised organogram changes that I made to senior management as a result of this review. This has been brought together, Chairman, in the 4 recommendations in 2.1, little 1, little 2, little 3 and little 4, and therefore members' consideration. We have had a number of questions and we thank members for putting those to us, and we'll endeavour, if we possibly can, to provide any clarification to those. I think that's all I need to say, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. From the chair, I will propose recommendations as set out in 2.1 of the report. Do I have a seconder?
Yeah, happy to second that.
Thank you, Councillor Pettit. Councillor Kane.
I'd like to propose an amendment to the recommendations, which I've tabled. But basically, it adds on little 1, it adds with concern. So it's probably easier to read what it would end up being. It would end up being note with concern the changes to the corporate risk register in relation to A6 and the inclusion of risk A7 as detailed in Appendix 1 as amended, and require that progress on mitigating actions be reported to each audit committee meeting with immediate notification of any slippage. Delete the original little 2 and renumber. New little 2, recommend to, was little 3, recommend to Operational Services Committee to undertake a review of the waste and recycling service and require ECSS to prepare a project plan for implementation by April 2024, and delete the original little 4 and add a new little 3, require the Chief Executive to commission an independent review of the governance of ECSS and ECTC and make recommendations for a robust structure.
Thank you. I see you have a secondary, Councillor Christine Whelan. Right. Before we move to the debate, and thank you both from our side, a couple of questions we put in, and thank you Liberal Democrat members for the questions they put in and the answers that we've been tabled today. For the benefit of anybody watching, those questions and answers form part of the minutes of this meeting and will be published accordingly. Any further comments or questions before we move into the debate? Councillor Kane.
Thank you. I asked some follow-up questions to the previous meeting about whether the water temperature was being tested every week, and the answer is it's being tested monthly. At the last meeting, we were told the test should be done weekly, which is the correct answer.
Chairman, I wasn't at that item, but I don't know whether colleagues have got any clarification. We'll, of course, we'll bring that to members' attention. I think the question was answered by our client services facilities manager.
So a question for you, Chair. If we're not allowed to invite people such as directors or observers to this meeting, and the process for written questions is not to those people, how do we get assurance and answers from those people?
As far as the issue of inviting people is concerned, I chose to take the advice and guidance from the Chief Executive. As far as questions to members are concerned, in my view, the correct place for that is at council.
Can I just add, apologies, Councillor Kane, for cutting across. There isn't a mechanism for asking formal questions to members at this level, and they can be asked obviously at council, and that's, you know, but we are reviewing our constitution, so there may be an opportunity to revisit that. In terms of asking questions, the questions are answered by a whole range of officers which are pre-submitted, and in the case of the company, the managing director does all the answers to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, you'll be aware that at the combined authority, the Audit Committee and the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, relevant officers attend and answer questions. And indeed, at the last Overview and Scrutiny Committee, the lead member on one of the items we were looking at attended and answered questions. And I would like it recorded that I do not think this committee can discharge its responsibilities properly if there is no way, other than the one question a member is allowed to ask at full council, there is no way we can properly question the people involved in these companies. So, Chair, another question for you. You were a director of the company that we're looking at the report that says there were governance failures and that it's a very high risk. Could you explain your thought processes for why you felt you didn't need to declare an interest on this item?
No.
Would you be willing to explain your thought processes for why you feel it's proper for you to chair this item as a previous director of the company that we're told has some serious failings and is high risk?
Clearly, it is a number of years ago since, and I cannot see a reason why I shouldn't continue to chair this meeting.
When you were a director of that company, how often did you review the management accounts?
Having only just seen your questions, literally when I got to the office, I can't remember, and I would have to check back.
Okay, so we have officers. I asked a question about how the risk management group was apparently unaware of the issues that the chief executive has identified in his briefing note. when all but one of them attend the ECSS meetings? And the answer is they attend in their capacity as ECDC officers. I don't understand. I'm trying to understand how they attended those meetings. They must have known what the chief executive put in his briefing. So why has that not come through into the descriptions they've given of the risks in the past?
John. Thank you, Chairman.
Sorry, John, could I have the risk management group answer that one?
Excuse me, Chairman, can I clarify the answer to the question, because it does involve the review, which is the agenda item we're discussing. The review was brought to the attention of the risk management group. I forgot what date, was it 17th September? As I indicated in the email to both Councillor Brown and yourself, was to facilitate a discussion in the light of my review, and the risk management group, with the attendance of the internal audit, took that information away and made the changes that I've identified in the group. Those, and also, if you've seen the report, I have shown that there have been issues related to the reporting of information to ECSS. So it is not surprising, therefore, that officers who attend in their capacity as monitoring officer and section officers, 115 officers, weren't fully aware of that situation. The purpose of the review, Chairman, was to inform the risk management group of my review, and that they've made the responsible changes to that. I think that's all I can add to that, Chairman.
Thank you, John. Councillor Kane.
Can I ask a specific question then for the risk management group? We understand from the chief executive's briefing to members that the board of ECSS wasn't reviewing management accounts. The members, all but one of the members of our ECDC's risk management group, would have been aware that the board of ECSS was not reviewing management accounts. Why did they not consider that a significant risk?
The issue, as John Hill has already described, is in relation to the timing of when information became aware. And yeah, clearly there was an issue with management accounts not being included on ECSS's agenda, but that was an oversight, and it was something which hadn't been picked up by the risk management group until the report which John has alluded to.
Thank you.
Chair, can I ask the risk management group whether they think the board of a trading company should regularly review the management accounts?
Again, speaking, well, I mean, I can't speak on behalf of the group. Obviously, I can speak as your Section 151 officer, and clearly would be good practice for the management accounts to go to ECSS board, and that's why there is now, why that process is now put in place and will continue in place in the future.
Well, Chair, I remain very concerned about how the risk management group is operating when they told us consistently for some time, despite questions, that the risk was amber and well controlled, and yet they knew that the board was not reviewing management accounts. I honestly find it hard to think that anyone would not consider that that made it high risk. If you're not looking, you're not going to see.
Okay.
Okay, I asked if one of the directors stands down, we'll only have 2 directors and the minimum number is 3. And how and when would the 3rd director be appointed? The answer I got was that the chief executive could use his powers under the grounds of urgency to appoint a new director. I don't understand how it would be urgent, given that at the end of last month, the chief executive informed us that a director would be standing down. There has been plenty of time to bring the recommendation for an appointment of a new director to the council. So how would it be a matter of urgency?
Thank you, Chairman. The management changes that I'm introducing will be effective from the 1st of November, when there will be obviously changes in relation to the responsibilities of the Director of Operations. And from that point on, we will require an additional director. I will take advice at that particular time by virtue of Councillor Kane's correct information that the company needs an additional director to make it quorum. I will be taking advice, and I suspect that advice will tell me there is a requirement to have a new director in place. And if that is the case, I will be making that decision on matters of urgency. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
It's in the Articles of Association that there has to be a minimum of 3 directors. So how do you need advice that you have to have 3 directors? Why don't you know that?
Chairman, I feel I'm repeating myself again. It wasn't a question of what's in the Articles of Association. I'm very clear about that. It's whether, because we don't have a full council, who are the only people who can appoint other than myself until next year, I suspect, and I think I was quite open with committee, that I expect there need to be business conducted that requires that board. And I think this committee would be concerned if that wasn't the case. And I suspect I will be making a decision on the basis of urgency, which will be reported to February committee. And I think that's the right thing to do, Chairman.
Thank you, John.
Chairman, can I have it recorded that I am very concerned that, having informed members of the decision that one of the directors was going to resign as of the 1st of November, in good time to have put a recommendation to full council this Thursday to appoint a new director, that hasn't been done. And so we now find ourselves in yet another little muddle that will have to be sorted out by a use of a procedure that is arguably not appropriate for a trading company. We should have full directors. We normally, at full council, we normally get told Director X is going to retire and we resign, and we recommend Director Y be appointed. And I don't understand why we haven't followed that process this time. And I think it's deeply regrettable.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to get into start debating.
I know, but I have to understand what's going on at this company. We all have to understand what's going on at this company. I asked several questions about when the board of ECSS approve things, and I've been told no board approval is required. Now, I find this really strange. Why doesn't the board of ECSS have to approve seconding a member of staff? Who at ECSS approves that?
Chairman, the answer to the question is correct. The operational management of ECS, and for that matter is ECTC, lies in its heads of service and its directors, and it's made by myself as managing director in exactly the same way as I make the decisions in respect of management restructuring of this council as head of paid service. And I shared those with members as soon as I practically could. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
So is that the costs of those secondments are within the original budget and business plan of ECSS?
Defer to my colleague, but all the finances are reflecting the new arrangements, which will be reported to the next board, is my understanding. Ian.
Yeah, I mean, clearly I don't have a full understanding of, I'm not involved in the detail of the ECSS accounts, but my understanding is the restructure which is being proposed in John's recommendation is cost neutral to the companies.
Okay.
Chairman, can I provide some clarification? As I said before, the board will receive the fullest accounts at its next meeting, which will reflect the various changes, because it's not only in respect of the secondment, obviously, there's some changes with respect to the full secondment of the Director of Commercial. So we'll get a full picture of that shortly. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I would like it recorded that I'm concerned that decisions can be taken that moves our trading company away from the business plan that was agreed with the Operational Services Committee, acting as our shareholder committee, without even the ECSS board having the opportunity to consider and decide whether or not to approve it. Moving on, I asked a similar question about the negotiation of the terms and conditions and agreeing the terms and conditions. And I'm told again that no board approval is required. And yet that is a substantial part of the reason for the overspend. So I don't understand why no ECSS board approval is required for someone to take a decision that is significantly outside of the budget available. So perhaps I can have an explanation.
I think it's similar to the answer I gave some moments ago with respect to the responsibilities of the managing director in relation to the company. It's a negotiation, Chairman, and it's a consultation, and that's why I indicated in my report it would have been inappropriate to seek to quantify those changes prior to the agreement and the consultation, because that presupposes an outcome. Obviously, my review reflects that, and that we became known of the full quantum of that, which was a very complex set of renegotiations, which members were made aware of informally during the process. So no, I think as I've indicated in the answer to the question, everything was appropriately dealt with. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
So, Chair, I would like it recorded that I am concerned that a significant negotiation that was likely to, and indeed did lead to a considerable extra financial commitment well above the original business plan and well above the agreed fee income, was decided without real involvement, direct involvement from ECSS board. I would have expected that the board would have given an outline sort of budget for how much they were willing to allow the negotiations to pay, and then to have approved the negotiations. In fact, in the early days of the committee, I suspect of the ECSS board, I suspect it may well have approved terms and conditions. And I find it inexplicable that we have a trading company where the board allow a single director to negotiate and agree revised terms and conditions that go so far away from the business plan. And I think we as an audit committee should be very worried about that, because I would expect we need the ECSS board to be in control of its business.
Sorry to continue the intervention. The negotiations and proposed consultation response was agreed by the Joint Consultative Committee in relation to East Cam Street C, which is entirely appropriate and mirrors the very process that we operate at ECDC. Just for the matter of record. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
And then I asked if the director stands down, would there be a director with waste management experience, which is generally seen to be good practice in a trading company, to have at least one director who has some direct experience in whatever the trade is, in this case, waste management. And I'm told not, but there will be a management team with appropriate experience. So I'm just wondering what discussions the ECSS board have had about the implications of not having anyone on their board who has direct experience of waste management.
The answer to the question indicates that there is obviously waste management experience in the operation of the company. And the purpose of the board is to have an oversight based on those reports coming to us in relation to the operational efficiency of the company. Many companies are very wide ranging in terms of their ambit and can't reflect all that, but I'm satisfied and believe, and is directly related to this review, it was appropriate to, and I assume Councillor Kane's referring to the Director of Operations, it was appropriate that that Director of Operations is brought into the client side to make the very necessary review, which is going to be fundamental to the future of the council's delivery and strategic options. So it was a matter of judgment, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you.
I asked about what training the directors received, and I was told that on incorporation, the directors had training from Trowers and Hamlins, and that subsequent directors are made aware of requirements. I just wonder, how are they made aware and where is that documented?
Chairman, I'll have to discuss that with the company secretary and get back to all members of the committee if we could have notes of that. Thank you.
Again, I'd like to record that I think it is absolutely essential that all new directors are given proper training and induction when they join the board. That the board is the source of control for the trading company, and we need to know that all members of that board are aware of their responsibilities and how to discharge them. Yeah, I've talked about not being able to speak to the external auditors. Yes, I asked what reviews the board has carried out to satisfy themselves that they can continue to trade despite their auditor's material uncertainty about whether they're a going concern. Now, this is a major issue. If your auditor has a material uncertainty about whether or not you're a going concern, then I would expect to see the board meet urgently and both look at how they're going to address that and satisfy themselves that that it is proper to continue trading. And the answer I got is an initial review has taken place and this was communicated to members. I don't remember seeing that communication. When did we receive that?
Chairman, the matter of the material concern was reported to members in the briefing that I set out and sent out prior to this committee. It's very, and it was all in the open domain. And for a matter of public record, I think it's important to record that this committee. The committee, and again in that briefing, I reported that the board felt unable to sign off the accounts on that basis and made the mitigation, which is in your recommendations, which will go to council this week, to make some urgent revisions to the memorandum of agreement. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
That wasn't actually my question. My question was, what reviews did the board carry out to satisfy themselves that at the moment it's proper to continue trading?
Chairman, the minutes of the board will be circulated to members. And thank you.
I asked about why we needed to change the MOA to talk about the board reviewing management accounts and reporting overspends to us. The current shareholder agreement actually defines that they should send material changes to us. Material is an understood phrase in accountancy and leaves the responsibility for deciding when to report to us where it belongs, which is with the directors of ECSS. They should decide whether something is material. I don't understand why we're putting a definitive figure in when we already have a much better phrase in the shareholder agreement. And I'm surprised at the suggestion that there isn't a clear definition of material change.
Chairman, I think we're having the debate that will happen at council on Thursday. The board felt it was important to have a parameter and a obligation, which I think I accept Councillor Kane's point, but which will be specific. And the board felt that it was there needed to be a number in that particular, and that was discussed with the client as well, Chairman. So it was seeking to clarify and improve those words that Councillor Kane correctly reported to committee.
Yeah, thank you.
I asked how the risk management group is monitoring this risk now that it's acknowledged to be 20, which is in excess of our risk appetite. And I'm told that it's being monitored through the quarterly RMG group meeting. Why do we consider that a quarterly monitoring is sufficient for a risk of 20?
I think the point is, as John Hill has already stated, that the risk management group have identified the risk being a score above the appetite, and clearly the requirement of the risk management group at that point is to escalate the risk, and clearly the risk is coming to full council on Thursday for review and discussion, and so therefore the risk management group has done its role in ensuring that the risk has been escalated, and council will have greater knowledge of the risk and be putting in actions to resolve the risk.
Thank you.
So yes, I accept that the risk is being escalated, and that is right and proper. But my question was about how it's being monitored, and apparently it's being monitored by the risk management group and quarterly. And I'm asking how that is considered to be sufficient for a risk this high.
Through you, Chair, I think I've answered that question. Thank you.
I asked if on risk A7, if the first action was correct, and I've been told it was. So sorry, could someone just explain it, because I had trouble understanding what it meant. It says purchase of 10 times fleet hyphen ECSS undertaking fleet review for vehicles plus 5 years. So what does it mean?
Councillor Kane, help us with, are we referring to an answer to a question?
No, this is risk A7.
Yeah.
In your in the actions, the first action, I asked if it was correct because I didn't understand it. I'm told it is correct, so I'm asking if you could explain it. It says purchase of 10 times fleet hyphen ECSS undertaking fleet review for vehicles plus 5 years.
I mean, if I pick up that up as the chair of the risk management group. So, yeah, councillors are obviously aware that we have put in an order for 10 new fleet vehicles for the waste service, and they're expected to arrive on with the council the next month or so, hopefully this month. And what the action is saying is that we will continue to review all vehicles which have got a life of over 5 years to make sure they remain cost efficient, in as much that obviously we depreciate vehicles over a given life, but as they get older, the maintenance costs go up. So there's a calculation to be done, be whether the maintenance cost of a vehicle makes it inefficient, in whether we need to take on new vehicles earlier than we perhaps wanted to, simply because of the additional maintenance costs.
Thank you, Ian.
So thank you. Perhaps officers could slightly reword it before council, so it's clearer exactly what it means. Oh, yes, I asked if ECSS has completed its review of the MOA and will this be shared with shareholders? And I'm told the review hasn't been completed. So we're proposing to partially revise it at council, and then it will have to come back again when the ECSS board have reviewed it. Is that right?
We are proposing change to the MOA, immediate changes to reflect some of the immediate issues that have been identified in the review. Obviously, part of the strategic review undertaken by the client, if the Operational Services Committee agree and support our recommendation, will include revising the old MOA for the next phase of the delivery, but may also feel that it's important and necessary, and this is done on a bilateral negotiation basis, and be brought to council, whether there's any immediate changes it needs to make above and beyond those that are related to council. It's worth saying, Chairman, the MOA changes to council also include changes to the KPIs that were reported to Operational Services Committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
So it's not so much a question, but you'll be glad to hear this is the end for me anyway. I don't know who else wants to ask. I would have found it more helpful both to us as an audit committee and no doubt to any member of the public who reads these papers, if everything could have been in one place. So we have a members briefing that was sent out by the chief executive, but I don't think is in either our papers or the papers for full council. We have changes to the MOA that we're discussing today, but they're in the papers for full council. And as far as I could see, there was nothing in this paper about risk C3. I understand that the risk management group have decided that there is no change required to C3, but it would have been useful to have a little summary of the discussion and why they came to that conclusion.
Okay. Right, members. Councillor Kane, do you want to introduce your amendment?
Thank you. So I've asked a lot of questions about this, and I don't feel I've received full answers, and some of the answers have just added to my concerns. So if we start with the little one, I think we have to note that we're concerned rather than just note the changes. Appendix 1, as we know, is going to have to be slightly altered, so we need to refer to the fact that it's as amended. And then I think this is a significant risk, and we've heard from the risk management group that they're only monitoring it at their quarterly meetings. So I think it's important that the progress against the actions is reported back to us at each meeting. and so that we can follow it. And I think if anything is slipping, it should be reported to us immediately, not just waiting until the next meeting. I don't wish to support the changes to the memorandum of agreement as reported to council. My fundamental concern is on the financial management bit. I think it's both insufficient and unnecessary. It's insufficient because quarterly management accounts, when your finances are already challenging, remember they overspent by nearly $500,000 last year and they're forecasting an overspend this year. Quarterly management accounts is insufficient. I would expect the board to be reviewing their management accounts at least monthly. I also think that saying they only have to report to us if the overspend is more than 50,000 is too high. For example, they wouldn't have to report the current overspend because they're forecasting that it's going to be 47,000 by the year end. And I don't understand why we're just asking them to report overspends. Underspends can indicate problems as well. So I much prefer the wording in the shareholder agreement. It's much stronger. It says the company will provide to the shareholder full details of any actual or prospective material change in the business or the financial position or affairs of the company as soon as such details are available. The question for me is not, do we need to be writing in requirements somewhere else? It's why was that requirement not met last year? And the other issue I have is I don't think we should be constraining directors or possibly even giving directors comfort by saying they only have to review the management accounts quarterly. It's their responsibility. They have a legal duty to exercise reasonable care, skill, and diligence. So it's up to them to decide how often they should review management accounts. Yes, I know they weren't reviewing them regularly in the recent past, and I think that is a serious problem, which is why I would have liked to speak to the directors to understand how that arose. But I don't see that putting something in the MOA, I think that is a positive mistake to do that. It is the director's responsibility to run the company properly, and the shareholder agreement already requires them to tell us if there are changes, as indeed they did in, I think it was 2021, when they realized there was going to be an overspend, and they brought it to council very swiftly and we agreed it in year. Then you get the changing to the phrasing on the KPIs. I don't think that's for us really to comment on. I think that should have gone to Operational Services Committee to look at properly before it came to council. That said, I will comment on it because we've moved from targets and stretch targets to targets and tolerance. And as I understand it, current rules, if they don't meet the stretch targets, we can deduct £1,000 from the fee for each stretch target not met. It's not entirely clear what the proposal is in the MOA, but I think it's that if they don't meet the tolerance, that would trigger us deducting £1,000 from the fee. So we would effectively be lowering our ability to impose financial penalties if they miss their targets. I don't think in little 3, in the original motion, I don't think it's for the Operational Services Committee to prepare a project plan for implementation by 2025. I think that's for ECSS to do. And given that this is a flashing red 20 risk, I think 2025 is not anything like quick enough. I would like to see that done by April 2024, so that we know that we have a robust service going forward. So the changes in the original little 4, which I would like to delete because I don't wish to be implied that we approve those in any ways. They're not detailed in our papers, but I assume it's the memo that the chief executive sent out. And I'm not at all sure that I understand the relationship which the directors have, because if it is the memo, it came across that the chief executive, as head of paid service, had decided that the director of operations would resign as a director. It is for the director to decide, not for the head of paid service at ECDC. We can't be left with only 2 directors. We have to have 3. Despite the answers we've received, I'm not convinced that ECSS board shouldn't have to approve changes that impact on ECSS. And then fundamentally, I think we need the final thing, which is to commission an independent review of the governance of ECSS and ECTC, because it has many similarities to ECSS. I'm sorry, but I think the review that we've had is a good start, but I don't think it's sufficient to assure us that this company is under control and going to deliver to its business plan and deliver the services to our residents. And I would like a proper independent review. We keep making changes. Every time somebody, I mean, a while ago it was us questioning whether members could be directors. So suddenly it was decided, no, they wouldn't be, they would be observers. There's a big question mark about whether they're observers or whether they are in reality shadow directors. I know the council has taken legal advice on that, but it would be interesting to see what courts would decide if it ever came to that. We keep making these knee-jerk changes, and I think we actually need a proper review of how these 2 trading companies are structured and how they're properly controlled by us as shareholders. They manage a lot of money on behalf of this council, and they manage some critical services for our residents. And so I would like to see a proper independent review. And I think this audit committee really needs to know that these things are being properly managed.
Thank you. Councillor Whelan, you seconding?
I'm seconding and reserving right.
Right, thank you. All right, members, looking at the amendment as tabled, I can't support the amendment for a number of reasons. I don't think we can require ECSS to prepare a project plan. I think the review needs to, as recommended by the chief executive, the review for operational services, they need to set their timetable. I think we do need to acknowledge and support the requirement to amend the MOA. And I think we clearly have to note that the chief executive is implementing urgent changes to the organisational structure. I would fail to see what value we would get from requiring, even if we could require the chief executive to commission an independent review. I doubt whether this audit committee actually has the power to do that. So I'll be voting against it. Anybody else like to?
Can we have a recorded vote, please?
Yes, certainly.
I've just got a, sorry, apologies. Just got a question of clarification for actually 2.13. You've said recommend to Operational Services Committee to undertake a review, blah, 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 prepare a project plan for implementation by 2025. Would it be for operational services to sort of create the more detailed timelines of, because obviously if you're going to implement it in 2025, before then you're going to have to create it, get it reviewed. And so there's a lot of detail beneath that. Am I right in thinking operational services will be charged with producing that?
Absolutely, Councillor Horgan, and I've indicated that in my answer to Councillor Brown's question. For clarity, it says implementation by 2025. The 2025 date is when this council will be required, whether it's going to continue either with the current scope of the service and for that matter, continue with ECSS as a delivery model. Obviously, it will need to do two things. One, it will need to review what that service will look like. And two, it will need to review where the best value for money and other quality considerations will operate in respect of the various procurement options. So although 2025 is the implementation date, work will start immediately. And given the Operational Services Committee are the client and will potentially deciding whether ECSS even are able to deliver that service post 2025, it's entirely appropriate that you recommend for operational services to begin that review as a matter of urgency. Thank you, Chair. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying. And as long as you're satisfied that they will understand that level of detail, that answers my question. Thank you.
Anything further on the amendment? If not, we've been asked for a recorded vote. I think we'll just go to the vote, shall we? Tracy?
You are voting on the amendment that has been tabled for agenda item 6. Then I call the name, you say that you're voting for, against, or abstaining. Councillor Brown.
Against.
Councillor Kane.
For.
Councillor Gordon.
Against.
Against.
For.
Sorry, so the amendment is lost by 3 votes to 2.
Thank you, Tracy. You then return to the recommendations as in the printed report. Councillor Kane.
I can't support these recommendations. I don't think they treat with adequate seriousness the problems that the Chief Executive has identified at ECSS and the further problems, frankly, that lie behind those problems. I therefore can't support it and I would ask for a recorded vote.
Okay. Members, anything further to add to the debate, or shall we go to the vote? Go to the vote. Tracy, another recorded vote, please.
So this time you are voting on the motion, which is to accept the recommendations in the report. When I call the name, you say that you're voting
For, against, or abstaining. Councillor Brown.
For.
Councillor Kane.
Against.
Councillor Horgan.
For.
Councillor Pettit.
For.
Councillor Whelan.
against.
So the motion is carried by 3 votes to 2.
Thank you, Tracy. Could I just call a sort of 5-minute comfort break? Thank you. Right, welcome back, everybody.
Oh.
Sorry, Tracy, I need to start with that. That wasn't good. Right, brings us on to agenda item number 7, which is risk management policy and framework update. And can I ask Ian Smith to introduce this item?
Thank you, Chair. The risk management policy and framework are due for review. Updated versions are attached as Appendix 1 and Appendix 2 to the report, and committee is asked to recommend their approval to full council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Can I have a proposer and seconder for the recommendation, please?
I'm happy to propose.
Thank you.
I'm happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Horgan. Councillor Kane.
I'd like to propose an amendment that we delete 3.1.
That's a matter for the Constitution.
Precisely. So I would like to propose that amendment.
Right. You have a seconder? You'd like to introduce your? Or you don't?
Well, we're not responsible for risk management. The officers are responsible for risk management.
Maggie, do we have?
Chairman, it's set out in the terms of reference that the audit committee is responsible for overseeing and monitoring the council's corporate risk register and recommending revisions to the council's risk management, and therefore is responsible for risk management.
Thank you. So,
Chair, are you seriously saying that we 5 members are responsible for risk management at the council?
no,
And yet we can't see minutes of the meeting, we can't attend the meeting, we can't question the risk management group at this meeting.
however, there is a constitutional review working party going on at present, so that needs to be looked at there, in my view.
I want it recorded. I do not consider and refuse to be responsible for this council's risk management. That's not acceptable.
Well, since it's not in the actual recommendation, we do. Yeah, in the report, but it's not in the recommendation, which is why we're coming to. Yeah. So we're being asked to recommend to full council that the updated risk management policy and framework documents be approved. Yeah, I was just going to get to that bit. Right. Questions? Councillor Kane.
I asked how and when it was approved that we would continue with ECSS despite the risk being 20, given that it says that if a risk is over 16, in exceptional circumstances, the residual risk can be approved. So I asked how and when it was approved and where it's documented. And I also asked what the practical effects were of A6 and A7 being escalated to corporate management team, audit committee and council. The answer I got was this is covered elsewhere on the agenda, specifically in agenda item 6. Where is this covered in agenda item 6?
Clearly, we've already had a lengthy discussion on the risks around ECSS, which clearly these questions are referring to. So clearly that discussion has already been had. This item is about the wording of the policy and the framework, and so is not specifically relevant to issues around ECSS. Committee is asked to say whether they are comfortable with the policy and the framework, or if they're not comfortable with the policy and the framework, they should be offering suggestions to myself to potentially change the wording before it goes to full council. Thank you.
So I'm trying to understand how the policy and the framework work so that I can decide whether or not I'm comfortable with it. And it says that for risks of 16 and above, in exceptional circumstances, a residual risk in excess of the risk appetite can be approved. So I'm trying to understand how this works. And I thought, well, we have an example in front of us. So I asked how and when was it approved to continue with ECSS, and where is this documented? And I was told it's covered elsewhere on the agenda, specifically in agenda item 6. So I'm asking, where is it documented in agenda item 6? Failing that, perhaps you could just explain to me how the approval worked and how it's documented. I want to understand what the process means if the risk is 16 or above.
Through you, Chair, I believe I've answered that question.
Chair,
Thank you.
the question hasn't been answered. I'm trying to understand how the process works. And I've given a specific example and I haven't had an answer. I don't understand. We have a process that says if the risk is over 16, it can still be approved. So I want to understand, how does that happen? How would it be approved and where would that be documented?
Right, I'll take that up offline.
If I could have it noted that that question wasn't answered.
Yeah.
The 6 monthly monitoring, I think we've been told, no, we haven't, no. Before we raised the risk of A6, when we thought it was an amber risk and it was monitored 6 monthly, I asked how that monitoring happened. And I'm told that was covered elsewhere on the agenda, specifically in agenda item 6. And again, I'm asking where in agenda item 6 was that covered?
Through you, Chair. Clearly, the review of risk A6 and A7 have been covered in the previous item. The risk, as detailed in the policy and the framework, the risk management group meets quarterly and reviews all risks as part of that process. And the output from the risk management group, i.e. the risk register, comes to this group, this committee, on a half-yearly basis for further review and comments.
Thank you, Ian.
So what I'm not understanding, Chair, because this is fundamental to this report, we know that the risk management group meets quarterly to review the risks, but we're also told that if risks are of a certain level, then a certain thing happens. So we're told that if a risk is green, 1 to 4, it's just monitored as necessary. If a risk is amber, 5 to 15, we're told it has 6 monthly monitoring. If a risk is red, we're told that they're escalated to the corporate management team, etc. Now we appear to be told that actually whatever the risk score, they're all monitored on a quarterly basis at the risk management group meetings. Is that what we're actually saying?
I mean, clearly all risks are monitored on a quarterly basis as the risk management group. That's a matter of fact. Clearly, if a risk goes above the risk appetite, then there is an escalation process in place, which again, we've discussed and is detailed in the policy and framework. And clearly that has kicked in relation to the risks in relation to ECSS, and that's why we now have reports at this committee, and there'll be reports at full council on Thursday.
Yeah.
So, but in terms of monitoring, it will just be like all the other risks. It will be monitored on a quarterly basis at the risk management group.
I think you've had that answer already.
Okay, the risk management group, a group of people who we're not allowed to speak to and who don't keep any notes or minutes that we're allowed to review, and a meeting that we're not allowed to attend. I personally don't find that satisfactory. Going back to the questions. Yeah, there are 4 references that I could find to how we manage a risk that is in excess of 16. In the policy, there's section 5 and appendix 1, and in the framework, there's para 3.8 and on page 18. And they're all slightly different. And I think it would be much more helpful to have standard wording, so we're absolutely clear what the process is if a risk exceeds or is 16 or higher. I also had a specific question on the description in the framework under 3.8, where it says that a residual risk over 16 has actions planned to reduce the score below this level on a timely basis. And what I don't understand is that saying that as long as there are action plans, it doesn't get escalated, it doesn't need approval? Or are they saying that those action plans have to be put in place automatically? I don't understand exactly what the meaning of that is.
I acknowledge that the wording on the different parts of the policy and framework are slightly different. I believe they all mean exactly the same thing, but if committee wish me to go away and have a standard wording in each of those sections, I'm happy to do that.
I think that would be helpful, Ian, if you.
Please. But I would also still like to understand what the wording in 3.8 means. It says the council has defined its maximum risk appetite as not accepting a residual risk score of 16 or more, unless actions are planned to reduce the score below this level on a timely basis. In exceptional circumstances, council can approve a residual risk, etc. So are we saying that if there are actions planned to reduce the score below this level on a timely basis, it doesn't need approval to continue and it doesn't get escalated?
No, clearly all risks above 16 will be escalated. Clearly the escalation will lead to actions, but clearly in relation to ECSS, we wouldn't close ECS down simply because we have a risk score of 20 when we're taking action to recover that position. So it's an interim stage where the issue has been escalated, action is being taken, but we still acknowledge that the risk score at that point, while then that mitigation is taking place, still remains above 16.
Yeah, I'm not talking about ECSS. I'm talking about the wording of this paragraph. It isn't clear, and I think it absolutely needs to be clear. I also wonder, what does a timely basis mean?
I think timely could be dependent on what the type of risk is. So I mean, I don't think you could have a specific length of time.
Right, Councillor Horgan.
Yes, with some sympathy of what Councillor Kane was saying regarding 3.1 of the report. I was just wondering, as we sort of agreed that some tweaks to the wording could be arranged, I found in Appendix 2, Section 3.10, second paragraph. I'm just wondering whether that first sentence there might be better than what's actually written in as 3.1. Page 9 of the Appendix 2.
Can I just say, look, that covering report has already been published. I think for the future, that would be much more sensible wording. The audit committee is responsible for overseeing the corporate risk register. But we can't go back and rewrite 3.1 because it's what this agenda item is recommending to full council the updated risk management policy and framework documents be approved.
So it's not possible to actually change it. So when it goes to full council, 3.1 reads.
But that page there,
yeah,
I wouldn't expect to go to full council. I would expect just the policy and framework as amended by what we've just agreed.
Does it or doesn't it?
Together with a copy of the relevant minutes. Right,
Just, it helps, Chairman. Obviously, the covering report is effectively an officer's statement of fact, if you like. That isn't a reflection of what's actually in the terms of reference of this committee, audit committee, and the monitoring officer has already read out what the actual wording that's in the terms of reference. That's an officer interpretation that may or may not be correct, that interpretation in 3.1, but the overriding thing is what it actually says in the terms of reference for the committee, which is at 3.5, which is, excuse me, taking my glasses off, to oversee and monitor the council's corporate risk register and recommend revisions to the council's risk management strategy. And that is exactly what you are doing in this report at item 7. That totally accords with what it says in your terms of reference, your responsibilities. So you can sort of argue the toss about whether this is a correct interpretation of that, but you have to refer to what it actually says in your terms of reference, and you are correctly doing what it says in your terms of reference. The purpose of this report is to review the current framework documents, the policy and the framework documents. They're attached as the appendices. You're making a recommendation to council to support the approval of those documents or not support the approval. If you want to make alternative recommendations to that effect, obviously you can do, and that again still falls within your remit within paragraph 3.5 of the terms of reference of the committee. But it is your role. Effectively, as an audit committee, you don't actually have any decision-making powers on this issue. It is oversight, and you've got to recommend the document to council. If you want to request or recommend changes to that, you can do that to council, but you can't actually approve those documents yourself. I hope that makes it a little bit clearer.
And we have already suggested some amendments to tighten up that wording? Councillor Kane.
I think what we've just heard is that we're responsible for oversight, which I'm fine with. What I'm not fine with is an officer paper that says categorically the audit committee is responsible for risk management. That suggests a fundamental misunderstanding by the officers of how the responsibility works. And given that, it makes it, everything flows from that. Anyway, I've explained my concerns about the policy and the framework. Another concern I have is that it says at 3.3, since October 2020, the way that risk is managed within the authority is mostly unchanged. So at item 6, we looked at a significant failure in our risk management. And in item 7, we're looking at a risk management policy and framework update that is mostly unchanged. I think that is complacent. I'd like to see a report on the lessons learned and whether there need to be any changes to our policy and our framework documents and how risk is managed in the council before we make a recommendation to full council. It failed. We have to be frank about that, and we need to understand why it failed and put improvements in place. So I think to bring a mostly unchanged report to us is unacceptable.
Well, my view is we've been through this and we've suggested some improvements. And I'm quite happy for us to recommend to full council that the updated documents be approved. Clearly that wouldn't be this Thursday, would it? Be the next one on. So we've had a proposal and a seconder. Can we go to the vote? All those in favour? Those against? Right, Tracy. Thank you. Brings us on to agenda item 8, the annual governance statement, even 22-23, first draft. And can I ask John Hill to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chairman. The consistent with last year's process and practice, which I think members I recall felt was an improvement on previous years, we use the first draft, which you have in front of you, to formally action a consultation process with all members of the committee and all substitutes of that committee. This gives an opportunity for members to take away the document, to either make recommendations or ask questions of clarification. So essentially, the first draft is a sort of first report is a process report. We do encourage, and I've given the timeline for that response, which I think is reasonably considerable, for members, if they've got questions of clarification that are not answered this evening or require a further officer input, please do that as soon as possible. And any proposals, recommendations, or proposals for amendment to the first draft will be formally tabled at the next committee together with a response to that. And we would encourage again members to participate fully in that, because we know in last year's board it had a significant impact on the final document. I don't really want to go any further than that, Chairman. Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you, John. Right, well, from the chair, I will propose recommendations as set out in 2.1 that we are asking the chief executive to formally consult with members and substitutes of the committee to enable a final draft to be presented to the next meeting in January 2024. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Horgan. Any comments, further comments? Again, Councillor Kane, thank you for the ones that you submitted in writing. Yes, Councillor Kane.
Yeah, Chair, I really I would like this committee to support the view that we ought to be frank in the governance statement about how this audit committee runs. Putting a statement that says other council officers attend in accordance with the chief executive's memorandum to council members 10th of August 2021. How does that help the reader? We should be very clear with the reader of the governance statement that we should be proud. It's in our constitution. It's what we've agreed as a council, that we do not run our audit committee in line with SIPFA guidance. That's perfectly fine. It's our right to do that. As you know, I think we're wrong to do it, but it is our right to do it. But we should be clearly telling the public that we do not follow SIPFA guidance.
Pardon me.
I take on board Councillor Kane's challenge about making that much clearer to the public. And I think there's a case for expanding that. And given this is made in a formal committee, I will take that comment back and see how we can. I think that was a response to a number of questions, not necessarily will find its way into the final. But I'm happy to take that away, Chairman, and acknowledge that we've gone down the decision and explained to the public what that means in practical terms, that the lead officer, that the report author, or any officer instructed by this committee to attends. And that was the case in the previous item with respect to myself, Chairman. But I'm happy to provide clarity on that, and we'll report that back to the next committee.
Thank you. Councillor Whelan.
Yeah, just clarification on some of the questions I asked. I assume they're taking this item now.
Sorry, I missed.
The questions that I asked, clarification. It said about the 204 staff have completed the training for the council and trading companies, still 16 still to attend. Training to be arranged at the depot for the remaining staff. When will this be implemented and the date when it's expected to be completed?
Can I take that back to the HR manager, and we will respond as soon as possible?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
also one more thing, sorry, about the actual layout of the, I've said it here, it's been noted, the document on Appendix 1 and the whole thing had like shifted down a lot. And anybody who reading this would find it difficult to see where the next item started and where the actual comments were on that. So that needs to be, I think, sorted basically.
Take that back. Thank you. Is there anything further? Right, so are we all in agreement with the recommendation? Please show. Unanimous, Tracy. Thank you, John. Brings us on to agenda item number 9, draft statement of accounts. Ian, can I ask you to introduce this item?
Thank you, Chair. Following a request from Audit Committee last year, a copy of the draft statement of accounts is brought to Audit Committee to be noted. It's ahead of the external audit.
Thank you, Ian. Any further comments or questions? If not, yeah, and thanks, Ian, for the clarity on the external audit, where we're at with all that in the written answers. Right, we're asked to note that they've been published on the website. Can we note that they've been published on the website?
Yeah, can I just note my sympathy for the accounts team of not knowing when the audit's going to happen, because I know the normal practice is that you avoid taking holidays when the audit's going to happen. And also you want to get on with the current year. And I think it's, as well as making it very difficult for anyone to get any assurance from the audit, it makes life absolute hell for the accounts team and no doubt for other staff across the council as well.
Absolutely. Right, brings us on to agenda item number 10, information governance annual report. Can I ask Maggie Camp to introduce this item, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I've just brought a report to you today. Members do have information every month regarding freedom of information requests, but as a result of internal audit, it was a recommendation was to develop an annual information governance report to come to members so they're aware of the more broader issues regarding data breaches, incidents, information requests, data protection training, transparency code, freedom of information and environmental information requests. So you have before you a report that I brought together, and this will be added to the forward agenda plan for the July audit committee going forward. And members are requested to note the report, but open for questions.
Thank you, Maggie. Any further comments or questions in addition to the written ones? Again, thank you very much, Councillor Kane.
I just want to say thank you for the report and well done for what is a pretty good turnaround, because I know it's difficult. And I was also very reassured by your answers to how we make sure we don't inadvertently send out sensitive data. I absolutely concur with not sending out Excel spreadsheets. It's very, very easy, as others have found, to find data in there that doesn't appear on the front. I would also warn you that I have in the past found a similar thing. Admittedly, it was in the days of Blackberries, but with PDFs, where people reading it on a Blackberry saw all the track changes, which included deleting some sensitive data. So it's worth double checking, even when you PDF something, that somebody can't actually get into the track changes and find something that they shouldn't find.
Right, so we're happy to note. Thank you. Brings us on to agenda item number 11, internal audit progress report. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the latest update on the delivery of this year's internal audit plan in the format that members of the committee will be familiar with. So at this point in the year, we remain on track in terms of delivery of the audit plan. And there is a copy of the full audit plan in table 1 on pages 6 and 7 of the appendix for you today. So members will note that from the report that there are three final audit reports that have been issued since the last audit committee meeting. So as usual, these are detailed for you in section 2.3 of the appendix, providing us the key findings of the audits and the outcomes. So just taking members briefly through those 3 audits. The first related to the payment card industry data security standard, so which we refer to as PCI DSS. So this is an area that hadn't actually been subject to an internal audit review previously when I inherited the internal audit service. It's something that we do have on our internal audit agenda, something we look at as part of our universe as a key area where we do need assurance as part of an organisation. Obviously, it's not something that hits your risk register as such on its own, but it does contribute to your overall regulatory compliance. So as set out within the paper on page 2 and 3 of the appendix, so we were able to see that the council has conducted work to comply with the standards in relation to completing self-assessments and also completing the scans of the network. However, based on the assurances that we were able to gather, we had some concerns around how the process is coordinated and how it's led, and also how that self-assessment is informed to make sure we've got a robust basis for those assurances that we've collated as part of that process. So on the basis of the findings as are set out in the report, we have provided a limited assurance opinion in relation to the design of the control environment, with recommendations around strengthening this process for collating that information, informing that self-assessment. I'm pleased to inform members that one of the actions in relation to the access to the Civica system, which actually officers had set a deadline at the end of December, has actually been completed early, which gives us reassurance that these actions are being taken forward with priority. And we'll obviously continue to monitor that and report back to the committee on progress. So whilst we gave a limited assurance on the design of the controls, we were able to give a moderate assurance on the compliance with what was in place at the time. And overall, we've given a medium organisational risk in relation to the findings. The second review, which starts on page 3 of the appendix, was in relation to use of agency staff and consultants. So this featured on the audit plan as an area of risk because it's something that I see a number of local authorities are quite heavily reliant on agency staff and consultants in recent years. And that brings with it a range of risks and need to comply with the relevant policies. So at East Cambridgeshire, the spend on agency workers and consultants is much lower, I'm pleased to say, than at other local authorities that I work with. But we were able to note a trend, and there is some increased reliance on these off-payroll workers in certain areas within the services. So we reviewed the controls in place, and we were able to say that procedures are in place for engaging these off-payroll workers. That included processes around checking for IR35, which is a tax requirement. So I won't go into the technicalities, but essentially the responsibility for IR35 assessments shifted to the local authority in a few years ago. So it's an area that I always want to make sure all of our councils are on top of and that we have a full audit trail in relation to. So whilst we were able to see that procedures are in place and they've been applied within in some respects, we did identify some areas of non-compliance, particularly in relation to where there was a lack of evidence due to line managers leaving the authority since the appointment had been made. There was also lack of evidence in relation to compliance with contract procedure rules, which is mentioned in the summary as well. And also we identified one off-payroll worker that hadn't actually been included in that central list, which was held by HR. We identified during the audit. So it just identifies that there's a potential need to strengthen up on the compliance in those areas. So we have made recommendations around these, and there is an action plan in place. In relation to procurement compliance as well, one of the areas was around extending placements. So whilst there is an approval form in place for engaging off-payroll workers, the timeframe is set and there isn't a process in place for extending that. And as noted in the report, 55% of those that we looked at had actually been extended. So we just need to see an approval mechanism in place around that. So those are being taken forward as part of the action plan. And we've given a moderate assurance rating based on those findings for the design of the controls and the compliance as at the time of audit, with a medium organisational risk. And the last audit was in relation to information governance. So you've received a report this evening, which came out of the audit. It was one of our recommendations that you should receive an annual report at this committee. So this is an area that does feature, of course, on the council's corporate risk register, something we always want to have that rolling assurance over compliance with information governance. It's a very wide area. So when we undertake these audits, we tend to take a bit of a thematic approach so that we can have a good go at whatever area we're looking at, and then we'll look at a different area next time. In this particular review, we looked at policies, data protection, impact assessments, staff training and guidance, data breach processes, privacy notes, and data retention schedules, amongst other related controls. So on the basis of the testing that we conducted on those areas, we were able to give a good level of assurance, both in terms of the design of the controls and the compliance, and a low organisational risk overall. So also within the report is an update on the implementation of audit recommendations. So on page 8 of the appendix is the usual statistics table for you, which shows that 4 actions have been marked as completed since the last committee meeting. And we currently have 6 actions which are overdue based on the timeframe that was originally set. One of those falls into the category of being medium priority and over 3 months overdue. And on that basis, there is a further detail provided for you on page 9 in table 3 with the latest update and the latest revised date for implementation from officers as well. So also within the report on table 4 and page 10 is the latest feedback from customers on their satisfaction with the audit service. So again, the majority are good or outstanding. So I'm happy with that delivery so far this year. And that is a quick run through of the report, Chair, but I'm happy to take any additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you for everything you do in internal audit. And I always find your reports very clearly written and easy to read. Members, any further comments or questions to Rachel? Councillor Kane?
Yes, thank you very much for the report. I concur that it is always a very useful report. There are two things that arise from it. One is on the agency review, the fact that the contract procedure rules are not being consistently followed. That this has been a pattern since this audit committee began, that we get reports on one area or another of the contract procurement rules not being followed. And I would really like this committee to ask the finance director to provide us with a report on the contract procurement rules, so that we understand how they're being properly highlighted to staff, how staff are being trained, how it's being managed. Because as I say, we've had several audit reports over the years that have identified aspects of the contract procurement that isn't being followed. And I really think as a committee, we need to get to grips with that. The other thing that I'm finding frustrating is the timing of things. So, for example, on this one, we're told that the action on the staff claims is more than 3 months overdue. Now, it already hadn't been done on the 31st of May, but this is the first time this committee is being told, because it's the first time it's clicked over the 3 months, and we're now told that it's going to be done by December. I really would like either that the actions are timetabled so that they should be completed in time to be reviewed, in time for this committee to be told about it, or this committee states be reviewed, so that we are able to keep close tabs on it. I mean, we had a long argument under risk as to who was responsible for it, but we are responsible for the oversight, and it's very difficult to deliver that oversight if the timetable when things are supposed to happen means that we find out in October that something that should have happened in May, someone has decided it's not going to happen till December. And I don't find that very satisfactory. So I'd like someone to look at how we manage those timetables better.
Thank you, Chair. So obviously that's something that I can discuss with officers. Just to reassure the committee, obviously, whilst this is the first time it's reported to you, obviously the meetings are quite far apart for the audit committee. So the papers that were produced for this, obviously this action was not overdue by more than 3 months as at the time of last reporting. And we have quite a long lead in time for the committee papers. So it was actually only a few days overdue at the time of actually producing July's report. Just to reassure, I suppose, the committee as well, that whilst you are only receiving it at these points, we are following this up monthly. So it's not that it's not on the radar with management. We are monitoring this throughout the year. So it is something that we do on a rolling basis. So it's not that it's only followed up as part of the committee process. I suppose my only concern would be if we were to limit officers to setting timeframes that feeds into a committee timetable for every audit action, it almost makes it more committee report led rather than operational. And I just wouldn't want dates to be delayed to tie in with an audit committee, for example, if they should be done with more priority. So I need to make sure that the internal audit service is adding value 52 weeks a year and not just tied to committee timeframes. So it's something we can consider and maybe reflect on, but I would be a little bit nervous about moving how we set those times, if that makes sense, but I'm happy to look at any other.
Maybe a compromise, if it's not too much work, would be a report on the progress on them to each of our committees. So we would have seen that was falling at our July meeting, because it would already have missed its deadline, even though it was within the 3 months.
Through you, Chair. So obviously, if that's up to the committee, if the committee wishes that going forward, I report on all overdue actions rather than those that fall into the over 3 months category, then that's something we can implement going forward. Obviously, we do that to try and focus the committee's attention on those that have significantly exceeded their deadline. And that's what I do with all of the other councils that I work with. But if you are minded to agree an action that you want me to report all overdue actions in full detail going forward, that's something that I can take forward.
Could you reflect, because I am conscious that we contract a certain number of days. I don't want to lose internal audit, internal auditing stuff. If that's going to, if you reporting on all those is going to eat into those days and means we don't get the work done that we need done.
The data is there, so we are doing the follow-up, so it's all there. So I'm happy that it wouldn't take a great deal of extra time from us to report it to you, because as I said, I've reassured you that we do have that data, so we could do that. It's just whether or not the committee wishes to receive that full list going forward, or wants to focus that on the over 3 months overdue.
Yeah.
I mean, just to come in about the very specific risk in relation to table 3 about the staff claims, a number of the recommendations in the staff claims, the deadline set by HR in resolving those was the end of December. This specific one they hope to do to a faster timescale, but in reality what's happened is it needs to be done in the same timescale as the other risks in relation to staff claims, so therefore they're all going to be resolved at the same point rather than this one done to a faster timescale, and that's why this is delayed. It is to fit in with other work on the same in the same audit recommendations.
That's okay.
I think my concern, and whether it's for internal audit or managers, my concern is it was reported to us that it was going to be done by the 31st of May. And then it was decided that it would be December, but that it doesn't get reported to us. And this was an area that we were particularly concerned about at the time. It potentially puts us in trouble with HMRC, or it potentially, in this particular case, I think it means we're potentially paying an essential car user allowance to people who don't need it. So this committee was quite concerned about it. So it just seems wrong to me that it just quietly got moved by 7 months without this committee being made aware of that decision.
Noted. Anything further for Rachel? If not, we're asked to note the report. We're happy to note. Yeah. Again. That brings on to item 12, board agenda plan and dates of January and March meetings next year. The reason I put January and March on the agenda is because Councillor Kane and I are the council's representatives on CPCA Overview and Scrutiny Committee. At the last meeting, I think it's fair to say, Councillor Kane, whilst we finished shortly after 2 p.m, if we hadn't been in danger of being in court, it would have gone on much longer. And the problem is that those dates clash with our dates here in January and March. There seems to be there's a number of options forward. Either we change our date. I think it's unlikely that CPCA would change their date because there's far too many people involved in on the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, or we change our representatives on Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Because quite frankly, it's not going to work having those meetings on the same day with the current representatives. So what is your wish? Do we change our dates And if so, Tracy.
I
can you
think
draw that?
Ian, as Director of Finance, had a suggestion which sounded quite sensible, which would be to shift them from the Monday to the Thursday in those. No, okay. That's not going to work. Okay.
Councillor Kane?
Yeah, I agree with what you said, Chair, but I would also add the problem with having them close together anyway is that they both have a lot of papers to read. And so if we're getting two sets of chunky papers at the same time, it will be a challenge to give them both proper attention.
Can we draw around for some dates? Can we draw around for some dates?
Yes, Chairman, what I'll do then is I'll look at some suitable dates that fit in with the calendar and circulate them to members. Okay. Obviously for trying to get them as close to the January and March ones that we've got at the moment.
Yeah. Right. It's also the forward agenda item. Anything that we need to look at on the forward agenda? If not, declare the meeting closed. And I'll see you all on Thursday at council anyway. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you for your contributions.